Tell us about the olive oils that you keep in your kitchen, what styles they are, and why you have more than one type.
Well, it's very simple. First of all, I have more than one type for the different flavors, but mostly I have olive oil that I cook with and olive oil that I use, on salads, on dips, that I use without cooking. And these are the best olive oils that I would have, because once you heat up olive oil, you lose some of its flavor, not all of it, but you lose some of it. In fact, I think I remember Harold McGee telling me that you lose most of it. But it is, when you fry, like here in Sicily, everybody fries in olive oil, and extra virgin olive oil, not just pure olive oil. I mean, really good olive oil. And to be honest, it makes a huge difference.
Would you talk about that a little bit more? How the quality of the olive oil affects the success of a recipe?
Well, first of all, you have the consistency of the olive oil and the flavor. And it depends on what you're using it with. The stronger the flavor, you have to marry the flavors with what you're serving your olive oil with or using it with. So if you're using very, very, very good olive oil on salad, it slightly loses its pungency with the lemon juice or the vinegar. So you don't get the optimum flavor if you're mixing it with something else. But if you make a hummus or a beetroot dip or any dip, and you drizzle like fantastic olive oil on top, it doesn't actually get corrupted by the other flavor. It's like two flavors, one layer on top of the other. So the better the olive oil that you drizzle over your dips, the more flavorful your dips are going to be, because you have a great dip. And usually they're I don't use very much lemon juice in my hummus or in my mutabal or whatever. And so you don't get too much astringency playing against the olive oil. So that's how I calculate. So maybe, in my kitchen in Sicily, it's very easy because like everybody gives me olive oil and most of it is very good. So some are blended, with like 3 types. I think here the most common olive oil is with Nocellara, Biancolilla, and another type, I can't remember, like 3 different types of olives that they press together, but some people press like 1 type. And all this makes a huge difference to the flavor. Also, the consistency is very important. Some olive oils are kind of viscous and not very pleasant. Some are too light. It depends on in Liguria, they have very light olive oil, but it's also very, very good. So the Tuscan olive oil is different from the Ligurian, and the Ligurian and Tuscans are very different from the Sicilian. So it depends where you get your olive oil from and whether it's a single estate, if they pick by hand, if they pick early. All these things make, have an effect on how good your olive oil is. Not to mention how you keep it.
I know, most chefs, a lot of chefs just have one oil in their kitchen. They think that's enough. What would you say to a chef about why they should perhaps explore more of the range of olive oil styles? How it would improve their cooking?
Well, I think there are many chefs, like really, really good chefs, who don't understand the difference between mass-produced olive oil, where the olives come from different countries and are mixed together and pressed maybe, like in huge presses and not cold press and whatever. And that olive oil might have a good enough taste of olive oil, but it really is not the olive oil that you want to use even in your cooking. So it's very, very important for chefs to understand olive oil, the harvesting, the different types, where it comes from, how it's pressed, and how it's kept as well. And to do tastings, because they're very different. I come from Lebanon. Lebanese olive oil is quite different from Italian olive oil. There is this particular type of olive in Lebanon called suri that everybody swears by. And it's very good, but it's quite sharp and slightly bitter. At least the olive oils that I've tasted, from that olive. And it compares, in my view, unfavorably to the Italian olive oils, or let's say the Spanish. The French olive oil is very different. So it's very important for a chef who pays attention to ingredients, to techniques, to whatever, to pay more attention to the olive oil they use.
A lot of people have trouble with the really pungent oils that are, very bitter, very peppery. When do you find a good use for that style of oil? And, how can we help people appreciate that type of oil more?
Well, actually, I think strong tasting pungent olive oil is very, very good, but it depends. I mean, if you're using it with bread alone, it might be too strong and hits you like, in a slightly sort of disagreeable way. But if you use it on a dip, let's say a creamy dip like hummus or a beetroot mutabbal, then you get the mellowness of the dip counteracting the sharpness of the olive oil, and it's a great marriage, actually. Or in a salad, because it's going to be, kind of toned down a little bit by the vegetables, the salad vegetables and the lemon juice or vinegar. So then that strong flavor is actually a good thing, because it comes through better than if you're using a light olive oil. But it also, I think it depends on your palate. Some people like subtle flavors and others like strong flavors. I personally like pungent and slightly bitter olive oil. But if it's too strong and if it kind of stays at the back of your throat and slightly burns it, it's not actually burning, but it's a bit sharp, then it's not something that I would really like. But the really, really good olive oils are never that strong. They don't really hit you. I mean, you might have stronger flavors and whatever, but it's never something negative. It might be a little something that you might want to get used to or you're surprised by, but it really depends on the quality and how it's extracted and at what stage, the oil is extracted.
What about seafood? Let's talk about examples from the seafood realm. Are there great matches that come to mind for you between seafood dishes and styles of olive oil? Any particular style?
Well, I mean, if you take like simply grilled fish, and if you don't do anything to it, the best thing to once you kind of take the skin off, is to drizzle a little bit of olive oil and maybe a little bit of lemon juice if you want over that fish. Now, depending on the fish, but most fish flesh is quite delicate, white fish. So you don't want to use an oil that is too strong. Probably something light and fruity and not particularly pungent would be a great marriage. Here in Sicily, we eat a lot of raw shrimp. And that's another kind of seafood that is wonderful to have with very good olive oil. And again, because it's like the flesh is so delicate, you don't want to use an oil that is too strong. Again, something light and fruity with a very nice kind of texture or consistency. It goes very well with it.
When I think of how Americans tend to use olive oil, it's very sparingly. They just put as little in the skillet as they think they need, or they maybe put a few drops on something at the end. But Mediterranean cooks have a different approach. They seem to be much more liberal with their use of olive oil. Can you talk about what you've seen and experienced in your travels around the Mediterranean, how the great Mediterranean cooks use olive oil?
Well, I mean, olive oil is an absolute essential ingredient in a Mediterranean kitchen. It's impossible to go into a kind of Mediterranean kitchen and not find at least one type of olive oil. Even my mother, who's very old, buys, I don't know, a gallon or two every year and uses olive oil a lot. The thing is that the other day I went to lunch to a friend here in Sicily, And I saw her frying a lot of aubergines, eggplants, in olive oil. She poured a lot of olive oil in a huge, frying pan. And I was surprised. I said, I thought nobody fried in olive oil anymore. And she said, no, no, no. I mean, they produce olive oil. So for them, it's not such a big deal. But she also, her husband told me that now sunflower oil is more expensive than olive oil. I mean, the olive oil that farmers produce in Sicily, which are sold like at 6 or 7 euros a liter. And apparently in the supermarket, sunflower oil is more expensive. And when I tasted the eggplants, the fried eggplants, it reminded me of my youth when my mother used to use olive oil to fry. And she didn't like stint or anything. She filled the pan and she fried potatoes, eggplant, whatever she needed to fry in olive oil. People don't do that anymore. But, there's a whole range of Lebanese dishes that are called bilzet, meaning cooked in olive oil. And you don't use 1 tablespoon or 2 tablespoons. I mean, you don't have like a coating of olive oil on top when the dish is finished, but you really feel and taste the oil because, I mean, it needs to be used abundantly, but in balance with whatever else it's used with, whether it's a vegetable and tomato sauce or, whatever the dish is. So it's a very healthy ingredient and a very tasteful ingredient. And there's no reason to stint while using it because it kind of, I mean, apart from the calories, it adds a lot of flavor to whatever you're preparing.
It does seem to me like a key distinction that Americans think of olive oil as just sort of a fat, a medium for cooking, whereas in the Mediterranean, it's a flavor. It's a flavor you want in food. Would you agree with that? And if so, would you expound on it a little bit?
Well, I think olive oil in the Mediterranean is both a medium for cooking and a flavor and a condiment, let's say. You use it to cook all kinds of different dishes. Like I said, the dishes that are called bilzet in Lebanon and zeytinyali in Turkey. And these are all the vegetarian dishes that are served as part of a meze or for a vegetarian meal. And then you have the flavor, the olive oil used as a flavor, drizzled over labneh, over hummus, over salads, over grilled fish, over raw shrimp, like here, or just used with bread. Like when I go to the harvest, and then we go to the press to see, to check that the olives are, with Mary Taylor Simetia on that, to check that they're pressing the olives that you brought to the frantoio, the olive press. Then there is a wonderful moment at the end when the oil is kind of pressed that everybody gets around plates, that are filled, paper plates that are filled with olive oil with very good crusty bread. And they dip the bread into the newly pressed olive oil. And it's one of the best things that you can eat.
Would you talk about some other great memories of specific dishes with a specific type of olive oil? Something that you just remember where the olive oil kind of made the dish?
Well, the first dish that I have ever cooked in my life at 16 is a dish of green beans cooked in tomato sauce with a lot of garlic and with their skin on still. And the onion, you start with the sofrito, let's say, and frying the onion in very good olive oil. And then, that dish traditionally is eaten. So you cook the sauce, the beans, etc. And when it's ready, you spread it on pita bread. And then you use kind of dry pita bread to pick up the beans and a bit of sauce. And then the one layer of pita bread is soaked up in this tomato sauce with the olive oil, and you roll it and eat it with raw onion. I mean, sweet raw onion. And that is like the tomato cooked in the olive oil with a bit of onion and a bit of garlic is like one of the best. It's an extraordinary flavor because it's like a wrap, but a hot, moist, juicy wrap it's one of my favorite childhood memories, I have to say.
Just a couple more questions. One is about home cooks or chefs who might be trying to use more plants, have a more plant-based way of eating and way of cooking. Do you feel like olive oil takes on another role, maybe a more important role when you're trying to cook without animal protein?
I think it's very important when you're cooking vegetarian dishes. It's very important that every ingredient is good, and to start with the oil instead of using like tasteless vegetable oil. I mean, I'm not knocking it. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you use olive oil, first of all, the texture, it's heavier, I think, as an oil. Also, it's more flavorful. And even if you lose some of its flavor, it seeps into the vegetables, whether they're cooked in a sauce or fried or, lentils, legumes or whatever. That kind of, it doesn't replace meat, but it gives more consistency. It gives more richness to the dish. And it's very, very important to use good olive oil for that. And it kind of makes your vegetarian dish more richer and more flavorful and much more interesting as well.
Imagine that you're having some friends over for dinner. They're all vegetarian, not necessarily vegan, but let's say vegetarian. Can you walk us through a menu that you might make? And what styles of oil you would use for each of the dishes you choose to make?
So if I were to have a vegetarian dinner party, I would have a kind of meze spread. And I would have some cooked dishes and some kind of like salads and wraps, maybe savory pastries. So I would have either okra, depending on the season, either okra or green beans that I would cook in tomato sauce in a good extra virgin olive oil, but nothing special because it's going to lose some of its flavor with the heat. And then I would make a dip or two. So I would make baba ganoush that I would drizzle when it's ready. I would drizzle really good olive oil on it, but kind of like pungent, an oil that has a sort of slightly pungent flavor, so that you get the contrast between the strong olive oil and the mellow eggplant and tahini sort of dip. I would also have a plate of labneh, and I would drizzle a kind of lighter olive oil on it, maybe a Ligurian one or one from the south of Lebanon. And so that you taste the labneh, which is basically strained yogurt, and it enhances the sort of milky flavor. The olive oil, the light olive oil, will enhance the milky flavor, but without killing it. I would also have a fattoush or tabouleh. And for that, I would use a really, really good olive oil. In fact, if I make a fattoush, because I'm not using lemon juice, I'm only using sumac, I would use like the best olive oil I have, because that would marry really well with the salad vegetables and the grilled pita bread. And in fact, for the fattoush, I usually mix the sumac and the olive oil with the pita bread first, so that it doesn't go soggy very quickly. And I would have crudité. I'd make a hummus as well. And then I would drizzle the hummus with very good, a strong olive oil as well. And then I'd have crudité. I'd have olives that I would have marinated with more olive oil and maybe a little bit of parsley and pepper paste and lemon, segments of lemon. And then, don't you think it's enough for a dinner party? Or should I add one or two more dishes? Or maybe I will have a lentil dish. So to add a little bit of, I'll make mujaddara. And for the mujaddara, I have a garnish of like crispy fried onions in olive oil, but a regular extra virgin olive oil.